My daughter, Veronica, banned me from her engagement party because she was embarrassed of me. What she didn't know was that I owned the venue. So when 150 guests showed up to celebrate her special night, they found locked doors and a sign that read, "Event canceled due to disrespectful behavior." Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you've sacrificed everything for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm 52 years old, and I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would deliberately ruin her own daughter's celebration. But after 28 years of raising Veronica, after putting her through private school, college, and graduate school, after helping her build the life she wanted, she decided I wasn't good enough to stand beside her on one of the most important nights of her life. You see, I'm not the polished, sophisticated woman that Veronica wanted as a mother. I'm Elena Rosewood, and I built my success from absolutely nothing. I grew up in the trailer parks of Millfield County, where dinner sometimes meant sharing a can of soup between 3 people. My own mother worked double shifts at the local diner just to keep a roof over our heads, and I swore that my children would never know that kind of struggle. When I was 19, I started cleaning office buildings at night while taking business courses during the day. For 15 years, I scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and cleaned bathrooms in downtown Ravensshallow's business district. But I was smart, and I was watching. I learned how these businesses operated, how real estate worked, and most importantly, how money moved in this city. By the time I was 34, I had saved enough to buy my first small commercial property, a rundown building that nobody else wanted. I renovated it myself, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos and weekend workshops. Within 2 years, I had turned it into the most sought-after event venue in Ravenshallow. The Grandview Manor became the place where the city's elite held their weddings, corporate events, and milestone celebrations. Over the next 18 years, I expanded my business empire. I now own 4 premium venues, 2 catering companies, and an event planning service. The Grandview Manor alone brings in over $2 million annually. Every politician, every wealthy family, every influential person in Ravenshallow has celebrated something at one of my properties. I built this empire with my own hands, my own sweat, and my own determination. But to my daughter Veronica, I'm still just the embarrassing woman who doesn't know which fork to use at fancy dinners. Despite everything I've accomplished, despite the fact that my success paid for her designer clothes, her luxury car, and her graduate degree from Whitmore University, she sees me as beneath her new social circle. Veronica works as a marketing executive for Hartwell & Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. She's engaged to Theodore Ashworth III, whose family owns half the real estate in the historic downtown district. The Ashworths are old money, the kind of family that's been wealthy for so many generations, they've forgotten what it feels like to worry about paying bills. 3 months ago, when Veronica announced her engagement, I was overjoyed. I offered to host the engagement party at the Grandview Manor, free of charge, of course. I wanted to give her the celebration of her dreams. I even offered to handle all the planning, bringing in my best catering team and decorating the venue with the most expensive flowers money could buy. But apparently my generosity came with a catch I never saw coming. 2 weeks ago, Veronica called me and delivered news that shattered my heart into pieces. She explained that Theodore's family and their friends were a certain caliber of people, and that my presence might make them uncomfortable. She suggested that perhaps it would be better if I stayed away from the party altogether. When I asked her what she meant, she became more direct. She told me that my accent was too strong, that I didn't dress appropriately for their social events, and that frankly, she was worried I might embarrass her in front of Theodore's family. She actually used the word embarrass when talking about the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her the opportunities she now enjoyed. I tried to reason with her. I reminded her that this party was happening at my venue, with my staff, paid for with my money. But Veronica had an answer for that too. She said she would handle all the arrangements directly with my event coordinator. and that my involvement wouldn't be necessary. She was essentially treating me like a vendor rather than her mother. When I protested, when I told her how much this hurt me, she became cold and dismissive. She said that if I truly loved her, I would understand that this night was about her and Theodore, not about my feelings. She said that successful people sometimes have to make difficult choices, and that I should be proud that she was marrying into such an important family. The conversation ended with her telling me that the invitation list was final, and my name wasn't on it. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my office, staring at the phone, wondering how the little girl I had read bedtime stories to could grow up to be so cruel. But Veronica made one crucial mistake in her calculations. She forgot that while she might be embarrassed by her mother still owned the venue where she planned to celebrate her engagement. And after 28 years of putting her needs before my own dignity, I was finally ready to teach her a lesson about respect. What happened next would become the most talked about event cancellation in Ravenshallow's social history, and it would teach my daughter that success and class aren't about where you come from. They're about how you treat the people who love you most. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me paint you a clearer picture of who we're dealing with here, because understanding Veronica's transformation is crucial to understanding why what happened next was so devastating. Veronica Rosewood is 28 years old, stands 5'6" with perfectly styled auburn hair that costs more to maintain than most people's monthly rent. She graduated summa cum laude from Whitmore University with a master's in marketing, drives a BMW that I bought her for her 25th birthday, and lives in a penthouse apartment in Ravenshallow's exclusive Riverside district. Yes, the rent for which I've been covering since she started her career. But here's the thing about my daughter that breaks my heart. She wasn't always like this. The Veronica I raised was kind, compassionate, and proud of where she came from. When she was little, she used to brag to her classmates about how her mama could fix anything and built her own business. She'd bring friends home from school and excitedly show them around our modest house, pointing out improvements I'd made myself. The change started during her junior year at Whitmore University. That's when she met Clarissa Pemberton and Anastasia Blackthorne, daughters of prominent Ravenshallow families who took Veronica under their wing. Suddenly my phone calls became less frequent. When she did call, she'd mention these new friends and their family vacations to the Hamptons, their charity galas, their exclusive social events. I should have seen the warning signs when she started correcting my grammar during phone conversations, or when she began asking me not to mention my business when talking to her college friends, claiming it was too complicated to explain. But I was so proud of her academic success and so happy that she was making friends that I ignored the red flags. After graduation, Veronica landed her dream job at Hartwell & Associates, one of Ravenshallow's most prestigious marketing firms. The starting salary was excellent, but not excellent enough to afford the lifestyle she wanted. That's when I stepped in, as I always had, to bridge the gap. I covered her apartment deposit, her wardrobe expenses for work, even her gym membership at the exclusive Ravenshallow Athletic Club, where, she explained, networking happened. 6 months into her job, she met Theodore Ashworth III at a company networking event. Theodore is 31, handsome, in that clean-cut polo shirt and khakis way that screams old money. His great-grandfather founded Ashworth Development Corporation, which built half of downtown Ravenshallow's historic district. His family has been wealthy for so long that they've never had to think about money. It simply exists, like air or water. The Ashworth family owns a mansion in the prestigious Crescent Hill neighborhood, complete with manicured gardens and a staff of 12. They summer in Martha's Vineyard, winter in Aspen, and treat charity events like social competitions. Theodore himself works as a, quote, development consultant for the family business, which, as far as I can tell, means he attends meetings and signs papers that other people prepare for him. When Veronica started dating Theodore 8 months ago, the final transformation began. Suddenly, she was embarrassed by everything about her upbringing. She asked me to stop telling people I owned venues because it sounded too much like event planning. She suggested I hire a speech coach to soften my accent. She even recommended a personal shopper who could help me dress more appropriately for social situations. The most painful moment came 4 months ago when Theodore's parents, William and Patricia Ashworth, invited Veronica to dinner at their mansion. She called me the night before, panicked, asking me to coach her on proper dinner etiquette because she was terrified of embarrassing herself. I spent 2 hours on the phone teaching her which utensils to use and how to make appropriate small talk. After that dinner, everything changed. Patricia Ashworth had apparently taken a liking to Veronica, praising her intelligence and sophistication. But instead of being grateful for the foundation that made such sophistication possible, Veronica became determined to distance herself from her humble beginnings. She started referring to my business as property management rather than venue ownership, and when Theodore asked about her family, she described me as involved in real estate. The engagement happened 2 months ago during a weekend trip to the Ashworth family's vineyard in Napa Valley. Theodore proposed with his grandmother's 4-carat diamond ring in front of both families, except, of course, I wasn't there. Veronica had explained to the Ashworths that I was traveling for business and couldn't make the trip. I found out about the engagement through a Facebook post, like any other casual acquaintance. When she finally called to tell me the news personally, 3 days after it happened, her excitement was palpable, but it wasn't the excitement of a daughter wanting to share joy with her mother. It was the excitement of someone who had just secured their entry into a world they'd been desperately trying to access. "The Ashworths are so wonderful, Mom," she gushed. "Patricia already treats me like a daughter. They're going to help us plan the most incredible wedding. Theodore says it'll probably be featured in Ravenshallow Society magazine." That's when I offered to host the engagement party at Grandview Manor, thinking this would be my chance to finally meet Theodore's family and show them that Veronica came from good people who had built something meaningful. I imagined Patricia Ashworth walking through my beautiful venue, seeing the empire I'd created with my own hands, and understanding that success comes in many forms. I had no idea that my daughter had already decided I had no place in her new life, and that my offer to host her party would become the weapon she'd use to cut me out of her future completely. Looking back now, I can see that Veronica's behavior didn't just appear overnight. There was a clear pattern of escalating entitlement and disrespect that I chose to ignore because I was so desperate to maintain our relationship and support her dreams. The first real warning sign came during her sophomore year at Whitmore University. I had driven 3 hours to attend her Dean's List ceremony, proud as any mother could be. I had taken time off work, bought a new dress, and even had my hair professionally styled because I wanted to look nice for her big day. When I arrived at the university's prestigious Blackstone Hall, Veronica seemed genuinely happy to see me at first. But everything changed when her new friends arrived. Clarissa Pemberton swept in wearing what I later learned was a $5,000 designer dress, followed by Anastasia Blackthorne, in an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. These girls had that effortless elegance that comes from never having to think about money, and I watched my daughter's demeanor shift completely in their presence. "Mom, these are my study partners," Veronica said, and I noticed she didn't introduce me by name or mention that I was her mother. When Clarissa asked what I did for work, Veronica quickly interjected, "She manages properties in Ravenshallow," which was technically true but completely misrepresented the empire I'd built. During the ceremony, I sat alone while Veronica sat with her friends' families. The Pembertons and Blackthorns had reserved entire rows for their extended families, complete with professional photographers to capture every moment. When Veronica's name was called and she walked across the stage, she waved to their section, not mine. After the ceremony, there was a reception for Dean's List students and their families. I approached Veronica's group, hoping to congratulate her and perhaps get to know her friends better. But Clarissa immediately began discussing their spring break plans to Cabo San Lucas, casually mentioning the private jet her father had chartered. When Mrs. Pemberton asked about my family's vacation traditions, I mentioned our annual camping trips to Silver Lake State Park. The silence that followed was deafening. Anastasia actually looked confused, as if she couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose to sleep in a tent when hotels existed. That's when I saw something in Veronica's eyes that I'd never seen before. Shame. She was ashamed of our family traditions, ashamed of the memories that I treasured most. The drive home was awkward. Veronica spent most of it texting her friends and making plans for the summer. When I tried to reminisce about our Silver Lake trips and how much fun we'd had roasting marshmallows and hiking the trails together, she just nodded politely and said, "Those were nice times, Mom." But the real pattern of disrespect began during her junior year, right after she started dating Cameron Westfield, a wealthy pre-law student whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels. Cameron was Veronica's first serious boyfriend from money, and I was excited to meet him when she invited him home for Thanksgiving. I spent days preparing for that visit. I deep-cleaned the entire house, bought expensive ingredients for a feast that would rival any restaurant, and even borrowed my neighbor's fine china because I wanted everything to be perfect. I was so proud to show Cameron the home where I'd raised my daughter, the garden I'd cultivated, the improvements I'd made over the years. Cameron was polite enough during his visit, but I could tell he was judging everything. He complimented the meal with surprised enthusiasm, as if he hadn't expected someone like me to cook well. When I showed him the bathroom renovation I'd completed myself, he seemed genuinely shocked that a woman could handle plumbing and tile work. The real blow came the next morning when I overheard Veronica on the phone with one of her friends. She was in her old bedroom, probably thinking I couldn't hear her, describing the visit in detail. "It's so embarrassing," she whispered. "The house is nice enough, but it's so ordinary. And Mom keeps talking about all the work she did herself, like she's proud of being her own handyman. Cameron's trying to be polite, but I can tell he thinks it's weird." She went on to explain that she'd told Cameron my business was much larger than it actually was, implying that I was some kind of real estate mogul rather than someone who'd built success through manual labor and determination. She'd created an entire fictional version of our life to impress a boy who would break up with her 6 months later. That conversation broke something inside me, but I swallowed my hurt and continued supporting her dreams. When she needed money for a summer internship in Manhattan that paid almost nothing, I covered her living expenses. When she wanted to join the prestigious Delta Sigma Pi business fraternity, I paid the dues and the costly formal events. Every time she needed something, I provided it, hoping that my generosity would somehow rebuild the connection we were losing. The pattern continued after graduation. When Veronica landed her job at Hartwell & Associates, she called me with specific requests about how to present our family background. She asked me not to mention that I'd started as a cleaning lady, not to talk about our early struggles, and definitely not to bring up the fact that I'd done most of my property renovations myself. "It's not that I'm ashamed, Mom," she explained. "It's just that in this industry, perception matters. People make assumptions about your capabilities based on your background, and I need to be strategic about how I present myself." I understood the pressure she was under, so I agreed to her requests. When she brought colleagues to dinner at my house, I played the role of the successful businesswoman who'd always had money. I hid the before and after photos of my renovation projects. I never mentioned the years when we'd eaten mac and cheese for dinner, because it was all we could afford. I erased the struggle that had made our success meaningful. But Veronica's demands became increasingly unreasonable. She asked me to get my nails done professionally before meeting her work friends. She suggested I hire a personal trainer because fitness was important in professional circles. She even bought me a subscription to a fashion magazine, explaining that I needed to update my style for the social events she hoped to include me in. The breaking point in this pattern came 8 months ago, right after she started dating Theodore. I had invited them both to dinner at my house, excited to finally meet the man who'd captured my daughter's heart. I spent the entire day preparing Theodore's favorite meal, which Veronica had described in detail, and I'd set the dining room table with candles and flowers like something from a magazine. Theodore was charming throughout dinner, asking thoughtful questions about my business and seeming genuinely interested in my success story. I felt like maybe, finally, Veronica had found someone who could appreciate where we came from. But after they left, Veronica called me within an hour. "Mom, you can't tell people you used to clean buildings," she said, without even saying hello. "Theodore asked me about it after dinner, and I had to explain that you were exaggerating. I told him you'd worked in property management and were being modest about your early responsibilities." That was the moment I realized that no matter what I achieved, no matter how successful I became, Veronica would always see me as an embarrassment to be managed rather than a mother to be proud of. She had systematically erased my history, my struggles, and my accomplishments to fit the narrative she needed for her new life. And now, with her engagement to Theodore and her entry into the Ashworth family's social circle, she was ready to erase me entirely. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I was in my office at Grandview Manor reviewing contracts for 3 upcoming weddings, when Veronica called with what she described as exciting news about the engagement party. "Mom, I've been thinking about your generous offer to host the party at Grandview Manor," she began, and I could hear the forced enthusiasm in her voice. "Theodore and I have been discussing it with his family, and we're absolutely thrilled to accept." My heart soared. After months of feeling pushed aside, I finally had a chance to be involved in my daughter's happiness. I immediately started envisioning the possibilities. The grand ballroom decorated with cascading white roses and crystal chandeliers. My best catering team preparing a 7-course meal that would impress even the Ashworths. And most importantly, the opportunity to show Theodore's family that Veronica came from people who understood quality and elegance. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, already pulling up my calendar to block off the date. "When are you thinking?" "I can clear any Saturday you prefer, and we can start planning immediately. I'm thinking we could use the grand ballroom with the terrace overlooking the gardens. In October, the fall colors will be absolutely spectacular." There was a pause on the other end, and when Veronica spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. "Actually, Mom, there's something important I need to discuss with you about the planning process. Theodore's mother, Patricia, has very specific ideas about how events should be managed, and she's offered to take the lead on coordinating everything." I felt a small knot forming in my stomach, but I pushed down my unease. Of course I'd love to work with Patricia. I'm sure between the two of us, we can create something absolutely magical for you and Theodore. "Well," Veronica continued, and I could hear her taking a deep breath, "Patricia actually prefers to work directly with venue staff rather than getting multiple family members involved in the logistics. She thinks too many opinions can complicate the planning process and lead to confusion." The knot in my stomach tightened. "I'm not sure I understand, Veronica. This is my venue. My staff reports to me. If Patricia wants to plan the party, she'll need to coordinate through me." "Mom, please don't make this difficult," Veronica said, and I heard the first hint of irritation creeping into her voice. "Patricia has planned dozens of high-profile events. She knows exactly how these things should be handled. She just needs to work directly with your event coordinator to ensure everything meets the Ashworth family's standards." That phrase, the Ashworth family's standards, hit me like a slap. As if my venue, which hosted the city's most exclusive events, somehow wasn't good enough without Patricia Ashworth's oversight. As if I, who had built this business from nothing, didn't understand quality. "Veronica," I said carefully, "I've been planning events for 18 years. Grandview Manor has hosted senators, celebrities, and the wealthiest families in 3 counties. I think I understand what constitutes appropriate standards." "Of course you do, Mom," she replied quickly, but her tone was patronizing. It's just that Patricia has connections with specific vendors, certain preferences for how things should be done. She wants to bring in her own florist from New York, her preferred photographer, even her own musicians. It'll be easier if she coordinates everything directly. I was quiet for a moment, processing what I was hearing. My daughter was essentially asking me to turn over my own venue to someone else to plan her party. What exactly would my role be in all of this? I asked. You'd be providing the beautiful space, obviously, Veronica said brightly, and I'm sure Patricia will want to meet with you at some point to discuss the logistics. But honestly, Mom, this takes all the pressure off you. You can just relax and enjoy the party instead of worrying about every little detail. Enjoy the party, I repeated slowly. As a guest, you mean? Exactly, Veronica said, as if I'd finally understood something obvious. You'll get to experience your own venue from a completely different perspective. Won't that be fun? But something in her voice didn't match her enthusiastic words. There was a nervousness there, a forced quality that made me suspicious. Veronica, who exactly is on the guest list for this party? Another pause. Well, obviously all of Theodore's family, and they're close friends. And Patricia is inviting some family friends from the country club, plus my colleagues from Hartwell and Associates, and some of our friends from university. That sounds lovely, I said. What about our family? Will you be inviting your cousin Miranda and her husband? And what about the Hendersons from next door? They've watched you grow up since you were 5 years old. The silence stretched on for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Veronica spoke, and her voice was tight. Mom, this isn't really that kind of party. It's more of a sophisticated social gathering. Patricia has very specific ideas about the guest list and the atmosphere she wants to create. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. What exactly are you saying, Veronica? I'm saying that this party is important for Theodore's career and our future, she said, her voice becoming more clipped. The people attending are influential in Ravenshallow's business and social communities. The conversations that happen at this party could impact Theodore's opportunities at the family firm and my advancement at Hartwell and Associates. And you think our family and friends would somehow interfere with those opportunities? It's not about interfering, Mom. It's about fit. These people move in very specific circles, and they have certain expectations about social events. Patricia wants to ensure that everyone feels comfortable and that the conversations flow naturally. I felt my blood pressure rising. Are you telling me that the Hendersons, who own the largest accounting firm in the county, wouldn't fit in with your new friends? Or that cousin Miranda, who's a pediatric surgeon, somehow isn't sophisticated enough for the Ashworth crowd? Mom, please don't twist my words, Veronica said, and I could hear the frustration building in her voice. This isn't about anyone not being good enough. It's about creating the right atmosphere for the specific goals we have for this event. And what about me? I asked quietly. Do I fit the atmosphere you're trying to create? The silence that followed was deafening. When Veronica finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, I think it might be better if you weren't there. Those 8 words hit me like a physical blow. I actually had to sit down, feeling dizzy and nauseous. I'm sorry. What did you just say? I know it sounds harsh, Veronica said quickly, but please try to understand. This party is essentially a business event disguised as a social gathering. Patricia has invited Theodore's colleagues, potential clients, and influential family friends. The guest list has been carefully curated to create specific networking opportunities. And you think I would embarrass you in front of these people? It's not about embarrassment, Mom. It's about focus. I need to be able to concentrate on making the right impressions, having the right conversations. If I'm worried about managing different social dynamics, I won't be able to present myself in the best light. Managing different social dynamics, I repeated. You mean managing me. Mom, you have to understand how important this is for my future. Theodore's father is considering him for a partnership track at the firm, but that decision will be influenced by how well I integrate into their social circle. Patricia has made it clear that she's evaluating me as a potential daughter-in-law, and this party is essentially my audition." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what my daughter was telling me. She was asking me to provide my venue, my staff, and my resources for a party celebrating her engagement. But she didn't want me there because my presence might interfere with her social climbing. "So let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to donate my venue for your engagement party? Allow Patricia Ashworth to take over the planning and bring in outside vendors? And then stay home while you celebrate with people who are more important to your future than your own mother?" "When you put it like that, it sounds terrible," Veronica said, and for a moment I heard a trace of the daughter I used to know. "But, Mom, if this goes well, it could change everything for Theodore and me. We could have the kind of life, the kind of opportunities. I'm just asking you to sacrifice one evening so that I can secure my entire future." "One evening," I said softly, "my only daughter's engagement party. One evening." "I promise I'll make it up to you," Veronica said desperately. "After Theodore and I are married and established in the family business, there will be plenty of opportunities for you to be involved in our lives. But right now, I need to focus on making the right impression." That was the moment I realized that my daughter was not just asking me to miss her party. She was asking me to fund my own exclusion from her life. After hanging up the phone with Veronica, I sat in my office for over an hour, staring out the window at the Grandview Manor gardens that I'd planted with my own hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter wanted to celebrate her engagement in the very venue that represented everything I'd sacrificed to build for her future, but she considered my presence there too shameful to tolerate. To understand why this request cuts so deeply, you need to understand what Grandview Manor really means to me. This isn't just a business property or an investment. This building is the physical manifestation of every dream I'd ever had for myself and my daughter. Every brick, every piece of molding, every carefully chosen light fixture represents a piece of my soul that I poured into creating something beautiful and lasting. When I first bought this property 18 years ago, it was a crumbling Victorian mansion that had been abandoned for nearly a decade. The previous owners had let it decay to the point where most people saw only an expensive demolition project. But I saw potential where others saw problems. I saw soaring ceilings that could host elegant celebrations, wraparound porches perfect for garden parties, and grand staircases that would make brides feel like princesses on their wedding days. I spent 3 years of my life restoring this building, often working 16-hour days. I learned how to strip wallpaper and sand hardwood floors. I studied historical architecture to ensure every renovation preserved the mansion's original character. I haunted salvage yards and estate sales, searching for period-appropriate fixtures and furniture that would bring the space back to its former glory. During those restoration years, 5-year-old Veronica would often accompany me to the worksite. She'd play with her dolls in corners while I painted walls or help me sort through boxes of vintage doorknobs and cabinet hardware. I'd tell her stories about the families who had lived in this house generations ago, painting pictures of elegant dinner parties and grand celebrations that had once filled these rooms with laughter and joy. "Someday," I used to tell her, "when you get married, we'll have your wedding reception right here in the grand ballroom. You'll walk down that staircase in a beautiful white dress, and all our friends and family will be here to celebrate with us." Veronica would clap her hands and make me describe every detail of this imaginary wedding. She'd insist that we'd have pink roses everywhere because they were her favorite, and that I'd wear a purple dress because it was mine. We'd have a chocolate fountain and a band that played Disney songs, and everyone would dance until midnight under the crystal chandeliers. Those conversations weren't just fantasies to me, they were promises. Every dollar I invested in this restoration, every hour I spent perfecting the details, was motivated by the vision of someday sharing this space with the people I loved most. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a legacy for my daughter. The grand ballroom, where Veronica wanted to hold her engagement party, is the room I'm most proud of in the entire building. I spent 8 months on that space alone, carefully restoring the original 1890s parquet flooring and hand-cleaning each crystal on the massive chandelier. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a perfect view of the rose garden I planted, and the acoustics are so precisely calibrated that a string quartet in the corner can be heard clearly throughout the entire room without being overwhelming. But more than the physical beauty, this room holds the memories of every celebration I've been privileged to host. I've watched fathers walk their daughters down the aisle, seen grandparents dance with grandchildren, witnessed families coming together to mark life's most precious moments. This room has been filled with more love, joy, and connection than most people experience in a lifetime. And now my daughter was asking me to provide this sacred space for her celebration, while excluding me from participating in the joy it was meant to create. The financial aspect of her request was almost insulting in its presumption. Hosting an event at Grandview Manor isn't cheap. My standard package for an engagement party of the size Veronica was planning would cost at least $15,000, and that's before considering the additional expenses she was requesting. Patricia's preferred vendors from New York would easily double that cost, especially the florist she wanted to bring in, who specializes in rare orchids and imported roses. But the money wasn't really the issue. I would have happily absorbed those costs as my gift to Veronica, just as I'd absorbed countless other expenses throughout her life. What hurt was the assumption that my generosity came without the expectation of basic respect or inclusion. I thought about all the times I'd compromised my own dignity to support Veronica's ambitions. I'd agreed to minimize my humble beginnings when meeting her college friends. I'd played the role of the polished businesswoman to impress her colleagues. I'd even accepted her criticism of my appearance and behavior, taking it as guidance rather than the insult it actually was. But this request crossed a line that I hadn't even realized existed. Veronica wasn't just asking me to hide my background. She was asking me to completely remove myself from her life's most important moments. She was asking me to become invisible, to exist only as a resource to be utilized rather than a mother to be celebrated. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this engagement party was never really about celebrating her relationship with Theodore. It was about erasing me from her narrative entirely. By hosting her party at my venue while excluding me from attendance, she could tell her new social circle that she had access to Grandview Manor without having to explain or acknowledge the person who made that access possible. I imagined Patricia Ashworth and her friends admiring the beautiful space, commenting on Veronica's sophisticated taste in venue selection, while my daughter smiled and accepted their compliments as if she'd discovered this magical place on her own. I pictured Theodore's colleagues being impressed by the elegance and exclusivity of the event, adding to their positive impression of Veronica's social status, while I sat at home knowing that every detail they were praising represented years of my blood, sweat, and dreams. The emotional weight of this realization was crushing. I had spent 28 years building a life designed to give my daughter opportunities I'd never had, only to discover that she saw my love and sacrifice as obstacles to be overcome, rather than foundations to be grateful for. But beyond the personal hurt, I was also grappling with a larger question about what kind of person I had raised. How had a child who had been taught the value of hard work and integrity grown into an adult who could so casually dismiss the people who had shaped her life? How had my attempts to give her a better life resulted in someone who was ashamed of the very success that made her opportunities possible? As I sat in my office that afternoon, looking around at the empire I'd built through determination and sacrifice, I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could continue enabling Veronica's disrespectful behavior by agreeing to her demands, essentially teaching her that my love was unconditional, regardless of how poorly she treated me. Or I could finally set boundaries and show her that respect isn't optional, even from your own children. The choice I was facing wasn't just about one engagement party. It was about whether I would spend the rest of my life allowing my daughter to treat me as a source of resources rather than a person deserving of love and respect. I thought our phone conversation had settled the matter, but I was wrong. Veronica's request for me to skip her engagement party was just the opening move in what became a calculated campaign to wear down my resistance and secure my compliance. The first assault came 2 days later when Theodore himself called me. I was genuinely surprised to hear from him directly, as our interactions had always been filtered through Veronica. His voice was warm and charming, with that practiced ease that comes from a lifetime of social privilege. "Mrs. Rosewood," he began, "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to speak with you personally about the engagement party arrangements." My heart lifted slightly. Perhaps Theodore would be the voice of reason, the one who would insist that excluding me was inappropriate and unnecessary. "Of course, Theodore," I replied. "I'm always happy to hear from you. I understand there might be some confusion about the guest list and planning details." He continued smoothly. "I wanted to clarify the situation from my perspective and hopefully address any concerns you might have." He went on to explain that his family's social events were quite different from typical celebrations, with specific protocols and expectations that had been developed over generations. He painted a picture of formal dinner parties, where conversations followed particular patterns, where certain topics were discussed and others were carefully avoided, where every guest played a specific role in maintaining the overall atmosphere. "It's not that we don't value family," Theodore assured me, "but these events serve multiple purposes beyond celebration. They're opportunities for business networking, relationship building, and what my mother calls strategic social positioning. Everyone who attends understands their role in supporting those objectives." What he was describing sounded more like a corporate function than a family celebration, but he presented it as if this was perfectly normal and reasonable. He even suggested that I should feel honored that Veronica had earned her place in such an exclusive social circle. "The truth is, Mrs. Rosewood," Theodore said, his voice becoming more intimate, "Veronica is still finding her footing in our world. She's incredibly intelligent and sophisticated, but she needs space to establish herself without the pressure of managing family dynamics that might not align with the evening's objectives." His words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear. I was a liability that needed to be managed, not a mother to be celebrated. The next phase of the campaign came from Patricia Ashworth herself. She called 3 days later, introducing herself with the kind of polished warmth that immediately put me on guard. Patricia had perfected the art of delivering insults wrapped in compliments, and she deployed this skill masterfully during our 40-minute conversation. "Elena, dear," she began, "I've heard so many wonderful things about you from Veronica. She speaks so admiringly of your business success and your independence. It's truly inspiring to see a woman build something meaningful through sheer determination." But then came the pivot. "I understand you've generously offered to host our little celebration at your venue, which is absolutely lovely of you. Veronica has shown me photos, and the space appears quite charming, very authentic." The way she said authentic made it sound like a polite way of saying rustic or quaint. She continued by explaining her vision for the party, which involved transforming my carefully designed space into something that met Ashworth family standards. "Now, I hope you won't be offended," Patricia said, "but I've arranged for my preferred decorator to assess the space and make some adjustments. Nothing major, just some enhancements to elevate the atmosphere. We'll bring in proper linens, of course, and some additional lighting fixtures. My florist will need to completely redo the garden arrangements to achieve the level of sophistication we're accustomed to." She was essentially telling me that my venue, which had hosted senators and celebrities, wasn't good enough for her son's engagement party without significant modifications. But the most insulting part of Patricia's call was her attempt to position my exclusion as a generous gift to me. "I know Veronica mentioned that you might prefer not to attend the actual event," she said sweetly, "and I think that shows tremendous wisdom on your part. Hosting can be so stressful, and this way you can simply enjoy knowing that you've provided the foundation for Veronica's special evening without the pressure of entertaining." She made it sound as if skipping my daughter's engagement party was a relaxing spa day rather than a devastating rejection. The campaign intensified when Veronica's colleagues from Hartwell and Associates began reaching out to me. Apparently, she had enlisted them to help convince me that her decision was reasonable and necessary for her career advancement. Jennifer Carmichael, Veronica's supervisor, called to explain how important this party was for Veronica's professional development. She described it as a determine whether Veronica was considered for the senior marketing position that would open up next year. Mrs. Rosewood, Jennifer said earnestly, I've seen incredibly talented people plateau in their careers because they couldn't navigate the social aspects of business networking. Veronica has the skills and intelligence to go far, but she needs to prove she can move comfortably in elite social circles. Even Marcus Whitman, one of Veronica's work friends, called to share his perspective. He explained that he'd attended several Ashworth family events and could attest to their atmosphere. He suggested that as someone who loved Veronica, I should want to give her the best possible chance to succeed, even if that meant making personal sacrifices. Think of it as an investment in her future, Marcus said. One evening of stepping back could secure decades of opportunities for her. The most manipulative call came from Clarissa Pemberton, Veronica's university friend who had first introduced her to this world of social pretension. Clarissa positioned herself as someone who understood both sides of the situation. Mrs. Rosewood, she said in a conspiratorial tone, I know this must be difficult for you, but I want you to understand how hard Veronica has worked to establish herself in Ravenshallow's social hierarchy. You should be proud that she's managed to earn acceptance in circles that are notoriously exclusive. Clarissa went on to explain that these social circles had unspoken rules that were difficult for outsiders to understand. She suggested that my presence might inadvertently create awkward moments that could damage Veronica's carefully built reputation. It's not personal, Clarissa insisted. It's just that people from different backgrounds sometimes have different communication styles, different ways of presenting themselves. Veronica is finally being seen as someone who belongs in this world, and we don't want anything to disrupt that perception. What struck me most about all these conversations was how coordinated they seemed. Each person who called used similar phrases and arguments, as if they'd all attended the same briefing session. They all emphasized Veronica's career advancement, the importance of social positioning, and the idea that my sacrifice would be a gift to my daughter's future. But the most hurtful aspect of this campaign was realizing that Veronica had shared intimate details about our relationship with all these people. She had apparently described me as someone who might not understand the sophisticated social dynamics of the Ashworth Circle. She had portrayed me as well-meaning but potentially embarrassing, someone whose presence would require management and might detract from the evening's objectives. The final blow came when my own sister, Rebecca, called after receiving a visit from Veronica. My daughter had driven 2 hours to Rebecca's house to explain the situation and ask for her help in convincing me to be reasonable. Elena, Rebecca said carefully, I love you, and I know how much Veronica means to you, but maybe she has a point about this being important for her future. These wealthy families have their own ways of doing things, and if fitting in means advancing her career. You think I should stay home from my own daughter's engagement party? I asked. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I think maybe love sometimes means giving people space to grow, even when it hurts us. That conversation broke my heart because I realized that Veronica's campaign had been so effective that even my own sister was questioning whether I was being unreasonable by wanting to attend my daughter's celebration. By the end of that week, I felt completely isolated and under siege. Every person in Veronica's life had contacted me to explain why my exclusion was not only acceptable, but necessary. They had systematically dismantled every argument I might make for my inclusion, preemptively addressing every concern I might raise. But what they hadn't anticipated was that their coordinated pressure campaign would have the opposite effect of what they intended. Instead of convincing me to accept my exclusion gracefully, they had shown me exactly how little respect any of them had for me and how far Veronica was willing to go to erase me from her life. Despite the relentless pressure campaign, I hadn't given Veronica a definitive answer about her demands. Part of me was still hoping that she would come to her senses, that the daughter I had raised would recognize how deeply her request had wounded me and find a way to include me in her celebration. I was clinging to the possibility that this was all just pre-wedding stress and social anxiety that would resolve itself once she had time to think clearly. That hope was completely shattered on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before the scheduled engagement party, when I made an unscheduled visit to Grandview Manor to check on some maintenance work. I had given Patricia Ashworth permission to meet with my event coordinator Sarah Chen to discuss basic logistics, but I expected to be informed before any major decisions were made about my own venue. What I discovered when I arrived changed everything. I walked into my own building to find it crawling with strangers. Patricia Ashworth was standing in the center of my grand ballroom, gesticulating dramatically, while a team of workers dismantled the crystal chandelier that I had spent 8 months restoring to its original 1890s glory. Another crew was covering my carefully preserved parquet flooring with industrial plastic sheeting, preparing to install what appeared to be a temporary marble dance floor. "Excuse me," I said loudly, trying to get someone's attention. "What exactly is happening here?" Patricia turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was dressed in a pristine white blazer and pearls, looking like she was conducting a board meeting rather than planning a party. "Elena, darling!" she exclaimed, as if my appearance at my own venue was a delightful surprise. "How wonderful that you're here. I was just overseeing some minor improvements to ensure the space meets our requirements." "Minor improvements?" I looked around at the chaos surrounding us. "You're removing my chandelier and covering my floors. What requirements are you talking about?" Patricia's expression became patient, the way you might speak to a child who wasn't understanding a simple concept. "Well, the chandelier is lovely, but it's not quite the right scale for the event we're planning. I've arranged for a rental of something more substantial. And the flooring, while charming, isn't practical for the type of dancing we expect. The marble surface will be much more elegant." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Patricia, this chandelier is an authentic 1890s piece that I personally restored. The flooring is original to the house and has been meticulously maintained. You can't just replace architectural features because they don't match your preferences." "Oh, but, darling," Patricia said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, "Veronica assured me that you wanted us to have complete creative control. She said you understood that our standards might be different from your usual clientele." Before I could respond, I heard Veronica's voice coming from the adjacent room. She was speaking to someone on her phone, and her words carried clearly through the open doorway. No, the mother situation is completely handled," she was saying. "Patricia has everything under control. We've made it clear that family drama won't be tolerated at this level of event." I moved toward the doorway, drawn by the cold efficiency in my daughter's voice. "Trust me," Veronica continued. "I've learned how to manage these situations. You can't let sentiment interfere with business objectives. My mother means well, but she doesn't understand the dynamics of serious social networking." I stepped into the room where Veronica was pacing near the windows, her phone pressed to her ear. She was wearing a navy designer dress that I had bought her for her birthday, and her hair was styled in the sophisticated updo that Patricia had apparently recommended for family appearances. "The venue owner is being accommodating," she said into the phone. "She knows this is important for maintaining our business relationship. These working-class entrepreneurs are usually pretty flexible when they understand the potential for future opportunities." The venue owner. She was referring to me as the venue owner, rather than her mother. I stood frozen in the doorway, listening to my daughter discuss me like I was a service provider whose cooperation had been successfully purchased. "Patricia Ashworth has everything organized perfectly," Veronica continued. "She's transforming this space into something actually worthy of the Ashworth name. The original decor was a bit pedestrian for our guests' expectations." Pedestrian. My life's work, the venue I had built from nothing, was pedestrian. And yes, Veronica said with a laugh, I've successfully navigated the family complications. Sometimes you have to be strategic about managing relationships that might not align with your trajectory. The venue owner has been convinced that stepping back is in everyone's best interest. I stepped fully into the room, and Veronica looked up, seeing me for the first time. Her face went completely white, and she quickly ended her phone call. "Mom," she said, her voice uncertain, "I didn't know you were coming by today." "Clearly," I replied. "Who were you speaking with?" "Just a colleague from work. We were discussing event planning strategies." She was scrambling, trying to figure out how much I had heard. "Event planning strategies," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call lying to your professional contacts about your own mother?" Veronica's composure cracked slightly. "Mom, you don't understand the context of that conversation. You were just explaining to someone how you've successfully manipulated the venue owner into accepting her exclusion from her own daughter's engagement party," I interrupted. "You were bragging about managing family complications and navigating relationships that don't align with your trajectory." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the doorway, I could hear Patricia Ashworth directing the workers to remove another piece of my carefully chosen decor. "Veronica," I said quietly, "do you even remember who I am?" "Of course I remember who you are," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Do you remember that I'm your mother? That I'm the person who taught you to read, who held you when you had nightmares, who worked 3 jobs to pay for your ballet lessons? Do you remember that I'm the woman who built this pedestrian venue with her own hands so that someday you could have beautiful celebrations here?" Veronica looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom, this isn't about our relationship. This is about exactly our relationship," I said firmly. "This is about you choosing to treat me like a business transaction rather than your mother. This is about you allowing strangers to dismantle the space I created while you stand by and describe me as a working-class entrepreneur who needs to be managed." I looked around the room, seeing my beautiful venue being systematically destroyed by people who saw it as inadequate for their standards. I thought about the phone calls I had endured, the pressure campaign that had isolated me from my own family, and now this ultimate humiliation of being treated like a vendor in my own building. "You know what, Veronica?" I said, my voice becoming very calm. "You're absolutely right about one thing. Sometimes you do have to be strategic about managing relationships that don't align with your trajectory." Something in my tone must have alarmed her because she finally looked directly at me. "Mom, what do you mean?" I walked back into the ballroom where Patricia was instructing workers to replace my antique sconces with modern track lighting. I watched strangers handling the decorative elements I had chosen with such care, treating them like obstacles to be removed rather than treasures to be preserved. That was the moment I realized that my daughter hadn't just rejected me. She had recruited accomplices to help her erase every trace of who I was and what I had built. She wasn't just excluding me from her party. She was allowing other people to destroy the physical manifestation of my life's work while she stood by and called it an improvement. I had spent 3 weeks trying to understand how my daughter could ask me to fund my own exclusion. Now I understood that exclusion was never the end goal. Complete erasure was. The confrontation that followed was unlike any conversation Veronica and I had ever had. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to protect her feelings or manage her reactions. I was done pretending that her behavior was acceptable, and I was finally ready to tell her exactly what I thought of the person she had become. "Veronica," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the workers, "I need to speak with you privately, now." She glanced nervously toward Patricia, who was still directing the removal of my decorative elements, with the enthusiasm of someone redecorating their own home. "Mom, this really isn't a good time. We're in the middle of important preparations, and—" "I don't care what you're in the middle of," I interrupted. "We're going to talk, and we're going to talk now." There was something in my tone that must have penetrated her social conditioning because she actually followed me out of the ballroom and into my private office. As soon as I closed the door behind us, she immediately went on the defensive. "Mom, before you say anything, I need you to understand that everything happening here is temporary," she began, speaking rapidly. "All of your original fixtures will be carefully stored and reinstalled after the party. Patricia's team is composed of professionals who work with historical properties all the time." "Stop," I said firmly. "Just stop talking for a moment and listen to me." But Veronica couldn't seem to control herself. The words kept pouring out as if she had rehearsed this speech and was determined to deliver it regardless of my response. "I know the modifications seem extensive, but Patricia explained that the Ashworth family has very specific requirements for their events. These aren't arbitrary changes. They're necessary adjustments to create the proper atmosphere for the type of gathering we're hosting." "The proper atmosphere," I repeated slowly. "And what exactly is wrong with the atmosphere I created?" Veronica's mask of professional composure slipped slightly, revealing the anxiety underneath. "It's not that anything is wrong, exactly. It's just that different social circles have different expectations. The people attending this party are accustomed to a certain level of sophistication." "Sophistication," I said. "You mean the kind of sophistication that your working-class entrepreneur mother couldn't possibly understand?" Her face flushed red. "You heard that conversation. I heard you describing me like I was a service provider whose cooperation you had successfully purchased," I said. "I heard you bragging about managing family complications and navigating relationships that don't align with your trajectory." Veronica began pacing around my office, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Mom, you're taking those comments completely out of context. I was speaking in professional terms because that was a business conversation about event management strategies." "Business conversation," I repeated. "Was it also a business conversation when you told whoever was on that phone that my venue was pedestrian and needed to be transformed into something worthy of the Ashworth name?" "I never said your venue was pedestrian," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, those were your exact words," I replied calmly. "You said the original decor was a bit pedestrian for our guests' expectations. You were discussing how Patricia was transforming the space into something, quote, actually worthy of your new family." Veronica stopped pacing and turned to face me, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. "Fine, yes, I said those things. But Mom, you have to understand the pressure I'm under. The Ashworth family has standards that are completely different from anything we've ever experienced. If I don't meet their expectations, it could destroy my relationship with Theodore. And you think the solution is to erase every trace of where you came from?" "I'm not erasing anything," she snapped. "I'm adapting to new circumstances. I'm trying to build a life that's bigger than what I grew up with, and sometimes that requires making difficult choices about presentation and positioning." The clinical language she was using, presentation and positioning, made my skin crawl. "Veronica, listen to yourself. You're talking about your own family like we're a marketing problem that needs to be solved." She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the uncertain young woman beneath all the social conditioning. "Mom, you don't understand what it's like to be constantly evaluated. Every conversation I have with Theodore's family is a test. Every social event is an audition. Patricia watches everything I do, every choice I make, and she reports back to William about whether I'm suitable for their family. And you think I would somehow interfere with that evaluation?" Veronica's composure cracked completely, and the truth finally came pouring out. "Yes, okay. Yes, I think your presence would interfere. Not because you're not wonderful, but because you remind everyone that I'm not from their world. When you talk about starting as a cleaning lady, when you mention our old apartment or the years when we struggled financially, it reinforces that I'm an outsider trying to fit in." I felt like she had physically slapped me. "So you're ashamed of our struggle. You're ashamed of the fact that I worked multiple jobs to give you opportunities." "It's not about shame," she said desperately. "It's about strategy. These people make judgments based on background and breeding. If they see me as someone who comes from poverty, they'll never fully accept me, regardless of my accomplishments. And what about my accomplishments? I asked quietly. What about the fact that I built a successful business from nothing? What about the fact that I created something beautiful and meaningful with my own hands? Veronica's response revealed the depth of her transformation. Your accomplishments are impressive for someone from your background, she said, and the condescension in her voice was unmistakable. But the Ashworths move in circles where business success is expected, not celebrated. They judge people based on things like education, family connections, cultural sophistication. Your type of success, it's just different from what they value. My type of success, I repeated, feeling something cold and final settling in my chest. Mom, please try to understand, Veronica continued, apparently oblivious to the impact of her words. I've worked so hard to position myself as Theodore's equal. I've studied their mannerisms, learned their social codes, adapted my entire personality to fit their expectations. If I introduce you into that dynamic, it undoes years of careful work. So I'm not just excluded from your engagement party, I said. I'm excluded from your entire future. Veronica's silence was answer enough. Let me ask you something, I continued. When you and Theodore have children, will they know they have a grandmother? Or will you tell them that their mother came from nothing and doesn't have any family worth knowing? That's not fair, she protested. Of course my children will know you. But they'll know you as the successful businesswoman you've become, not as someone who used to clean office buildings. Because being a cleaning lady is something to be ashamed of? It's not about shame, she exploded. It's about positioning. It's about giving my children every possible advantage in life, including the advantage of being seen as belonging to the social class they'll grow up in. I stared at my daughter, this stranger who was speaking about erasing her own history, as if it were a reasonable business decision. Veronica, do you love Theodore? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Of course I love him. Why would you ask that? Because everything you've described sounds like you're trying to purchase acceptance rather than share your life with someone who loves you for who you are. Theodore does love me for who I am, she insisted. But who I am now includes being someone who understands his world and can move comfortably within it. Love isn't enough, Mom. Compatibility matters, and compatibility includes social positioning. I realized in that moment that I was no longer speaking to my daughter. I was speaking to someone who had been so thoroughly transformed by her desire for social acceptance that she had lost sight of every value I had tried to teach her. One final question, I said. If Theodore's love is conditional on you erasing your history and excluding your family, what kind of love is that? Veronica's answer revealed everything I needed to know about the person she had become. It's the kind of love that comes with security, opportunity, and social status, she said, without hesitation. It's the kind of love that opens doors and creates possibilities for the future. It's practical love, Mom, and that's more valuable than sentimental love. That was the moment I knew that my daughter was truly lost to me, and that any action I took to protect my own dignity was completely justified. After that devastating conversation with Veronica, I sat alone in my office for nearly 2 hours, watching through my window as strangers continued dismantling the venue I had built with my own hands. But for the first time in weeks, my mind was completely clear. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I waited until the workers had left for the day, and Patricia had departed with her entourage of decorators and vendors. Then I walked through my vandalized venue, taking photographs of every change they had made, every piece of my original work they had deemed inadequate for their sophisticated guests. The evidence would be important for what came next. The first call I made was to my lawyer, David Brennan, who had handled all my business contracts for the past 15 years. David was accustomed to my straightforward approach to business problems, but even he seemed surprised by the clarity and determination in my voice. David, I said, I need you to draft a formal contract cancellation notice for an event scheduled at Grandview Manor in 3 weeks. The client has violated multiple terms of our venue agreement, including unauthorized modifications to historical features and failure to obtain proper permits for structural changes. Elena, David said carefully, are you sure you want to take this approach? Contract disputes can be messy, especially when family is involved. This isn't a family dispute, I replied. This is a business decision based on contractual violations. I'm terminating the agreement and invoking the immediate cancellation clause due to breach of venue policies. David worked quickly, and within 2 hours I had the legal documentation I needed. But the contract cancellation was only the first step in my plan. I had something much more comprehensive in mind. My next call was to James Morrison, the security chief for all my properties. James was a former police officer who understood the importance of following procedures precisely and documenting everything thoroughly. James, I said, I need you to change all the access codes for Grandview Manor immediately and install additional security cameras in the main event spaces. As of tonight, no one enters this property without my personal authorization. Should I be expecting trouble? James asked. I'm expecting people who believe they're entitled to access my property without respecting my authority as the owner, I replied. I want everything documented when they realize they're wrong. Then I began the most satisfying series of phone calls I had made in years. I contacted every vendor that Patricia had hired for the engagement party, the florist from New York, the specialty lighting company, the marble flooring rental service, the upgraded catering team, even the photographer she had flown in from Los Angeles. To each vendor I delivered the same message. This is Elena Rosewood, owner of Grandview Manor. I'm calling to inform you that the event scheduled for October 15th has been canceled due to breach of contract. Any materials delivered to my property will be refused, and any work performed without my authorization will be considered trespassing. The florist was the most shocked, but Mrs. Ashworth assured us that all arrangements had been approved by the venue owner. She protested. Mrs. Ashworth does not speak for the venue owner, I replied calmly. She is not authorized to make any decisions regarding my property or my business operations. One by one, I systematically dismantled every arrangement that Patricia had made. The specialty linens were canceled. The upgraded sound system was returned. The custom lighting installation was halted. Even the valet parking service that Patricia had hired to manage the exclusive guest experience received cancellation notices. But I wasn't finished. I had spent years building relationships with every premium vendor in the tri-state area, and those relationships were about to prove their value. I called my contacts at the other high-end venues in Ravenshallow and the surrounding cities, politely informing them that if the Ashworth family contacted them about hosting a last-minute engagement party, they should be aware that this was a client who had attempted to breach contracts and override venue owner authority. I wasn't asking anyone to refuse their business. I was simply sharing information that would help my colleagues make informed decisions about working with clients who didn't respect professional boundaries. The most crucial call was to my insurance company. I informed them that unauthorized modifications had been made to my historic property without proper permits or insurance coverage, and that I needed an immediate inspection to assess any potential damage. This meant that even if Patricia tried to continue with her renovations, she would be stopped by insurance and building code requirements. Finally, I contacted the Ravenshallow Historic Preservation Society, which had worked with me on the original restoration of Grandview Manor. I explained that unauthorized changes were being made to a historically significant property and requested an emergency review of the modifications. The Preservation Society took these matters very seriously, especially when original architectural features were being removed or altered. By 10 o'clock that evening, I had completely dismantled Patricia's takeover of my venue and erected a wall of legal, professional, and regulatory obstacles that would be impossible for her to overcome in 3 weeks. But the most important call was the one I made to my event coordinator, Sarah Chen, who had been caught in the middle of this entire situation. Sarah, I said, I owe you an apology for putting you in an impossible position with Mrs. Ashworth. but I need you to understand that as of right now, there is no engagement party scheduled at Grandview Manor on October 15th. Elena, Sarah said carefully, Mrs. Ashworth has been very clear that she has full authority to make decisions about this event. She showed me emails from Veronica confirming that the family had complete control over the planning. Sarah, I am the owner of this venue, I said firmly. I don't care what Mrs. Ashworth told you or what emails she showed you. She has no authority over my property or my business. The event is canceled, and I need you to remove it from our booking system immediately. There was a long pause before Sarah responded. Elena, are you absolutely certain about this? The financial implications alone. The financial implications are my concern, I replied. What matters is that people understand they cannot walk into my business, override my authority, destroy my property, and expect me to smile and provide services. There are consequences for disrespecting people, even when those people are providing generous gifts. The final step in my plan was the most delicate. I composed a carefully worded email to Theodore, copying Veronica and Patricia, formally notifying them that their event booking had been canceled due to contractual violations. I detailed every unauthorized change that had been made to the property, every vendor agreement that had been made without proper authorization, and every instance where my authority as venue owner had been disregarded. But the most important part of the email was the closing paragraph. Please understand that this cancellation is not a family dispute, but a business decision based on professional standards and contractual obligations. Grandview Manor has built its reputation on treating every client with respect and expecting the same in return. When clients demonstrate that they cannot operate within these basic parameters of mutual respect, we reserve the right to terminate our business relationship immediately. The deposit will be refunded in accordance with our cancellation policy, minus costs incurred for unauthorized modifications and any damage assessment required due to unpermitted alterations to historic property features. I scheduled the email to be sent at 8 a.m. the following Monday morning, giving myself the weekend to ensure that all my legal and practical preparations were in place. As I sat in my office that night looking out at the venue that represented my life's work, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I was taking action instead of reacting to other people's demands. I was setting boundaries instead of allowing them to be trampled. Veronica had made a calculated decision to exclude and erase me from her life. Now she was about to learn that excluding people comes with consequences, especially when those people control the resources you're depending on. The practical Elena, the businesswoman who had built an empire from nothing, had finally decided to stop enabling the entitled behavior that was destroying my relationship with my daughter. If Veronica wanted to treat me like a vendor rather than her mother, she was about to discover what happens when vendors decide they no longer want your business. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only October can bring to Ravenshallow. I was in my office by 7:30, having spent the weekend in a state of calm determination that surprised even me. At exactly 8 a.m., my carefully crafted email was automatically sent to Theodore, Veronica, and Patricia Ashworth, formally notifying them that their engagement party had been canceled due to contractual violations. I didn't have to wait long for the response. My phone started ringing at 8:17 a.m. It was Patricia Ashworth, and I could hear the barely controlled fury in her voice from the moment I answered. Elena, she said, her usual polished tone replaced by something sharp and dangerous. I just received your email, and I assume this is some sort of misunderstanding that we can resolve quickly. There's no misunderstanding, Patricia, I replied calmly. The event has been canceled due to multiple violations of our venue agreement. The cancellation is final. Violations? Patricia's voice rose an octave. What violations? We were making improvements to bring your venue up to appropriate standards for a sophisticated event. You removed historical fixtures without authorization, installed temporary flooring without permits, and made structural modifications without insurance approval, I said, reading from the detailed list I had prepared. You also contracted with outside vendors without venue owner consent and attempted to override established venue policies. Those weren't violations, Patricia snapped. Those were necessary upgrades. Veronica assured me that you had given us complete creative control over the event. Veronica is not the venue owner, I said simply. She has no authority to grant permission for modifications to my property. There was a long pause before Patricia spoke again, and when she did, her voice had taken on a tone I had never heard before. Pure, undiluted entitlement mixed with genuine shock that someone was defying her wishes. Elena, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with, she said slowly. The Ashworth family has significant influence in this community. We have relationships with city officials, business leaders, and social organizations that could impact your business in ways you might not anticipate. Was she actually threatening me? Are you suggesting that I should ignore contractual violations because of your family's social connections? I'm suggesting that you should reconsider a decision that could have far-reaching consequences for your business relationships in Ravenshallow, Patricia replied coldly. We move in circles that generate significant revenue for venues like yours. Patricia, I said, my voice becoming very quiet, let me be absolutely clear. I built my business by providing excellent service to clients who treat me and my property with respect. I have never needed the Ashworth family's influence to succeed, and I certainly don't need it now. The next call came 20 minutes later. It was Theodore, and he sounded completely bewildered. Mrs. Rosewood, he began, I'm hoping we can discuss this situation rationally. My mother is quite upset and Veronica is, well, she's having a difficult morning. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I felt no sympathy whatsoever. But the cancellation stands. I understand there may have been some miscommunication about the planning process, Theodore continued, but surely we can work something out. This party is incredibly important to our families, and canceling at this late date would be devastating. The planning process involved unauthorized modifications to my historic property, I replied. There was no miscommunication. There was a deliberate disregard for venue policies and property owner authority. Theodore's tone became more urgent. Mrs. Rosewood, you have to understand that we've already sent invitations to over 150 guests. These are influential people with busy schedules who have committed to attending this celebration. The social and professional implications of canceling at this point should have been considered before your family decided to override my authority in my own venue, I interrupted. But surely the financial compensation would make up for any inconvenience, Theodore pressed. We're prepared to double the venue fee if that would encourage you to reconsider. Theodore, this isn't about money, I said. This is about respect. Your family treated me like a service provider whose opinions and policies could be ignored. Money can't fix that kind of disrespect. The third call was the one I had been expecting and dreading. Veronica called at 10:30 a.m., and I had never heard her sound so completely unhinged. Mom, what have you done? She screamed into the phone. What have you done to me? I've protected my business and my property from people who don't respect boundaries, I replied. You've destroyed my life, Veronica sobbed. Do you understand what you've done? Patricia is furious. Theodore's father is questioning whether I'm capable of managing family responsibilities. The entire Ashworth family thinks I can't control my own mother. Perhaps you should have considered that before you decided to exclude your mother from your engagement party and allow strangers to destroy her venue. It wasn't destruction, it was improvement. We were making your venue worthy of the Ashworth name. And there it is, I said softly. You truly believe that nothing I've built is good enough without the Ashworth seal of approval. Veronica's crying became more intense. Mom, you don't understand the position you've put me in. Patricia had to call all the guests personally to explain that the venue canceled on us. She's telling everyone that we're dealing with, quote, difficult family dynamics that might impact future events. I'm sorry that's embarrassing for you, I said, and I was surprised to realize that I actually meant it. But actions have consequences, Veronica. Actions have consequences? She repeated incredulously. What about your actions? What about the fact that you've humiliated me in front of the most important people in my life? The most important people in your life, I said slowly. Not your family. Not the people who love you unconditionally. The people who can advance your social status. That's not fair, Veronica protested. You're punishing me for trying to build a successful life. I'm responding to you treating me like an obstacle to your success, rather than the mother who made your opportunities possible. The conversation that followed was brutal in its honesty. Veronica accused me of being jealous of her engagement, petty about social differences, and deliberately vindictive toward her new family. She claimed that I was trying to sabotage her happiness because I couldn't accept that she had outgrown her humble beginnings. But the most revealing moment came when she finally asked the question I had been waiting for. Mom, what do I have to do to fix this? What do you want from me? I thought carefully before responding. I want you to understand that respect isn't negotiable, even in family relationships. I want you to recognize that your success doesn't require erasing the people who helped you achieve it. And I want you to decide whether having me in your life is worth more than impressing people who judge you based on your family's background. There was a long silence before Veronica spoke again, and her response told me everything I needed to know about the person she had become. So you're saying I have to choose between you and Theodore's family? I'm saying you have to choose between maintaining your relationship with people who love you and pursuing relationships with people who require you to pretend your family doesn't exist. Another pause. Then, Mom, you're asking me to give up everything I've worked for. No, Veronica, I said sadly. I'm asking you to remember who you are and where you came from. But apparently, that's the same thing. When she hung up on me that time, I knew our relationship had fundamentally changed forever. My daughter had made her choice, and it wasn't me. In the days following the cancellation, Ravenshallow's social circles buzzed with gossip about the Ashworth engagement party disaster. I had underestimated how quickly news would spread through the tight-knit community of wealthy families, and I certainly hadn't anticipated the chain reaction of revelations that would follow. The first surprise came on Wednesday afternoon when Sarah Chen, my event coordinator, knocked on my office door with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of relief and guilt that immediately put me on alert. Elena, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, I need to tell you some things about what's been happening here that you don't know about. My stomach dropped. What kind of things? Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. Patricia Ashworth didn't just override your authority about the venue modifications. She also attempted to access your business records, your client database, and your vendor contracts. She told me she was conducting a quote, due diligence review to ensure the venue met Ashworth family standards. I felt my blood pressure rising. She what? She demanded to see your insurance policies, your maintenance records, even your financial statements. When I told her that information was confidential, she claimed that Veronica had given her authorization to conduct a complete business audit. The audacity was breathtaking. And what did you tell her? I told her I would need written authorization from you personally, Sarah continued. That's when she became aggressive. She suggested that I might not understand the, quote, caliber of client we were dealing with, and that my failure to cooperate could result in negative reviews that might damage the venue's reputation. I was speechless. Patricia Ashworth hadn't just been planning to take over my venue for one event. She had been conducting an investigation into my entire business operation. There's more, Sarah said reluctantly. She also made inquiries about purchasing the property. She asked me about your mortgage situation, whether you might be interested in selling, and what I thought a fair market value might be for the estate. She was trying to buy Grandview Manor? I asked, incredulous. Not just Grandview Manor, Sarah replied. She asked about all 4 of your properties. She seemed to think that if she could acquire your venues, she could ensure that future Ashworth family events would be hosted at locations that met their standards without having to deal with, how did she put it, difficult proprietors. The full scope of Patricia's plan was becoming clear. She hadn't just wanted to exclude me from Veronica's engagement party. She had wanted to take over my entire business empire to ensure that she never had to deal with people like me again. "Sarah," I said carefully, "did Veronica know about any of these inquiries?" Sarah looked uncomfortable. Veronica was present for some of the conversations about the business review. When I expressed concerns about confidentiality, she told me that Patricia was quote, practically family, and that sharing information with her was the same as sharing it with authorized family members. My daughter had not only excluded me from her celebration, but had also authorized her future mother-in-law to conduct a hostile investigation of my business operations. The betrayal was deeper than I had ever imagined. The second revelation came on Thursday evening when my sister Rebecca called with information that made my decision to cancel the party seem even more justified. "Elena," Rebecca said, "I ran into Margaret Pemberton at the grocery store yesterday. You remember, Clarissa's mother from Veronica's university friends. She had some very interesting things to say about the Ashworth family." "I'm listening," I said, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear more bad news. According to Margaret, the Ashworths have a reputation for this kind of behavior. Apparently, when Theodore's cousin married a girl from a middle-class background 3 years ago, Patricia orchestrated a similar campaign to minimize the bride's family involvement in the wedding planning. My heart sank. What happened? "The bride's parents were essentially pushed out of all the wedding decisions," Rebecca continued. "Patricia took over completely, changed the venue, replaced the bride's chosen vendors, and restructured the guest list to exclude most of the bride's extended family and friends. The bride's mother was so humiliated that she almost didn't attend her own daughter's wedding." "And the marriage?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Divorced within 2 years," Rebecca said grimly. Margaret said the bride couldn't handle the constant pressure to distance herself from her own family. Theodore's cousin remarried last year, to someone from an appropriate background this time. The pattern was becoming clear. Patricia Ashworth had perfected a system for isolating her son's partners from their original families and social networks, ensuring that her daughters-in-law would be completely dependent on Ashworth family approval and support. But the most shocking revelation came on Friday afternoon when I received an unexpected visitor at my office. It was Clarissa Pemberton herself, looking nervous and apologetic in a way I had never seen before. "Mrs. Rosewood," she said, "I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I need to talk to you about what's been happening with Veronica." I gestured for her to sit down, curious about what had brought one of Veronica's university friends to my office. "I need to apologize," Clarissa began, "for my role in encouraging Veronica to distance herself from her family. I've been watching what's happened with this engagement party situation, and I realize that I helped create a monster." She went on to explain how the wealthy social circle at Whitmore University had operated like a kind of finishing school for ambitious students from middle-class backgrounds. Girls like Veronica were recruited and mentored by established wealthy families, but the price of acceptance was the systematic erasure of their original identities. "We called it elevation," Clarissa said with obvious shame. "We convinced girls that they were being lifted up to a higher social level, but what we were really doing was teaching them to be ashamed of where they came from." "And Veronica was particularly receptive to this. Elevation?" I asked. Clarissa nodded. "Veronica was desperate to belong. She worked harder than anyone else to adopt our mannerisms, our vocabulary, our attitudes. But the more she succeeded at becoming one of us, the more contemptuous she became of her original life." The conversation that followed was deeply disturbing. Clarissa described a social system that deliberately targeted ambitious young people from working-class families, offering them access to wealth and status in exchange for complete loyalty to their new social class. The process was gradual and psychological, designed to make the targets believe that rejecting their families was their own choice, rather than the result of systematic manipulation. "Mrs. Rosewood," Clarissa said as she prepared to leave, I don't know if it's possible to get Veronica back. Once someone has fully committed to this transformation, they usually can't find their way home again. But I wanted you to know that the person she's become isn't entirely her fault. She was deliberately targeted and manipulated by people who saw her ambition and used it against her. That evening, I sat in my beautifully restored office, looking out at the gardens I had planted with my own hands, trying to process everything I had learned. My daughter hadn't just drifted away from our family values. She had been systematically recruited into a social system designed to destroy family bonds and replace them with class loyalty. But perhaps the most disturbing realization was that even knowing this, I wasn't sure it mattered. Regardless of how the transformation had begun, Veronica had ultimately chosen to embrace it completely. She had chosen social status over family loyalty, chosen the approval of strangers over the love of the people who had shaped her life. The manipulation might explain how she had gotten to this point, but it didn't excuse the conscious choices she had made to exclude and erase me from her future. Understanding the disease didn't cure the patient, especially when the patient believed that being sick was actually being healthy. As I turned off the lights in my office that night, I realized that the engagement party cancellation had revealed far more than just my daughter's ingratitude. It had exposed an entire system of social predation that I had been naive to think didn't exist in our modern world. But it had also shown me something else. I was stronger and more resourceful than even I had realized. When pushed to the breaking point, I had found the courage to stand up for my dignity and my values, regardless of the personal cost. The question now was whether that strength would be enough to help me build a new life without the daughter I had spent 28 years loving and supporting. 6 months have passed since I canceled Veronica's engagement party, and the dust has finally settled enough for me to reflect on what happened and what I've learned from this painful experience. The woman sitting in my office today, writing this story, is fundamentally different from the woman who spent weeks agonizing over her daughter's rejection. Veronica and Theodore did eventually get married, though it took them 3 attempts to find a venue that would accommodate their requirements on short notice. The wedding was held at the Ravenshaw Country Club, a perfectly adequate location that Patricia deemed, quote, suitable under the circumstances. From what I heard through my sister Rebecca, it was a small, elegant affair attended by approximately 60 guests, all from the Ashworth social circle. I was not invited, of course, but more importantly, I discovered that I wasn't devastated by the exclusion the way I thought I would be. The months of psychological preparation, combined with my growing understanding of who my daughter had become, had helped me achieve a kind of peace with her choices that I never expected to find. The professional consequences of my decision to cancel the engagement party turned out to be minimal, despite Patricia's threats about influencing my business relationships. In fact, the opposite occurred. Word spread quickly through Ravenshaw's business community about what had happened, and rather than damaging my reputation, it actually enhanced it. Business owners and professionals who had dealt with entitled wealthy clients recognized the courage it took to stand up to the Ashworth family, and many of them reached out to express their support. 3 new venues in the region contacted me for advice about handling difficult clients, and I've become something of an informal consultant for small business owners dealing with customers who think their wealth entitles them to override professional boundaries. My bookings at Grandview Manor have increased by 30% since the incident, largely because word spread that I was a proprietor who wouldn't compromise her standards regardless of a client's social status. Apparently, there are many people who appreciate doing business with someone who values respect over revenue. But the most unexpected development came 2 months after the wedding when I received a phone call from Theodore himself. He was calling from his office, and his voice carried a weight that I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Rosewood," he said, "I know this call might not be welcome, but I felt I owed you an explanation about some things that have come to light since the wedding." I was curious enough to listen. Theodore went on to explain that the marriage had been struggling almost from the beginning. The constant pressure from his family to maintain social appearances, combined with Veronica's increasing anxiety about meeting Patricia's expectations, had created a toxic dynamic that neither of them knew how to escape. Veronica changed after we got married, Theodore said. She became someone I didn't recognize, constantly worried about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, associating with the wrong people. She was so focused on being the perfect Ashworth daughter-in-law that she lost sight of who she actually was. He described a woman who had become paralyzed by social anxiety, checking with Patricia before making any decisions, including what clothes to wear and which friends to see. The vibrant, ambitious woman he had fallen in love with had been replaced by someone who second-guessed every instinct and deferred to his mother's judgment on matters ranging from home decor to career choices. I realized, Theodore continued, that my family's social system was designed to create dependency rather than partnership. Veronica wasn't becoming a stronger person by joining our family. She was becoming a weaker one. The conversation that followed was surprising in its honesty. Theodore admitted that he had been raised in an environment where love was conditional on compliance, where family loyalty meant accepting the judgment of previous generations without question. He had never considered that this system might be damaging until he watched it destroy the woman he loved. I tried to talk to Veronica about reaching out to you, he said. I suggested that maybe we had handled the engagement party situation poorly and that family relationships shouldn't be sacrificed for social positioning. But she couldn't even consider the possibility. She said that contacting you would be admitting that she had made a mistake, and that admitting mistakes would undermine her position in the family. Theodore's call wasn't just an explanation, it was also an apology. He acknowledged that his family's behavior toward me had been unacceptable, and that they had systematically undermined my relationship with my daughter for their own social purposes. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I wanted you to know that some of us recognize what was lost when Veronica was forced to choose between her family and ours. 3 weeks after that conversation, I learned that Theodore and Veronica were getting divorced. The marriage had lasted exactly 8 months. According to Rebecca, who somehow always knows these things, Theodore had filed for divorce citing quote 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 quote. But the real issue was that Veronica had become so dependent on his family's approval that she couldn't function as an independent adult. I felt a complex mixture of emotions when I heard the news. There was sadness for my daughter, who had sacrificed so much for a life that ultimately brought her no happiness. There was vindication that my instincts about the Ashworth family had been correct. But mostly, there was a deep sense of loss for the relationship that might have been possible if Veronica had chosen differently. As I write this story, I haven't spoken to my daughter in over a year. She moved to Atlanta after the divorce, taking a position with a marketing firm that has no connections to Ravenshollow's social scene. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that she's trying to rebuild her life and her sense of self, but I don't know if that rebuilding includes any recognition of the family she left behind. I won't pretend that I don't think about her every day or that I wouldn't welcome a phone call if she decided to reach out. The love I have for my daughter hasn't diminished, even though my respect for her choices has been permanently damaged. But I've also learned some important lessons about the difference between unconditional love and unconditional acceptance of bad behavior. I can love Veronica while still maintaining boundaries about how I allow myself to be treated. I can hope for reconciliation while accepting that it may never come. Most importantly, I've learned that self-respect isn't negotiable, even in family relationships. The people who truly love you will find ways to include you in their lives, not reasons to exclude you. If someone requires you to diminish yourself or erase your history to earn their acceptance, they're not offering love, they're offering a transaction. For anyone dealing with entitled family members or friends who take your generosity for granted, remember this: you don't owe anyone access to your resources, your property, or your emotional energy if they can't treat you with basic respect. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary for maintaining your dignity and your sanity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behavior, even when that someone is your own child. Sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve your own integrity when a relationship has become toxic. I built Grandview Manor to create beautiful memories for families celebrating life's most precious moments. I never imagined that my greatest lesson in family relationships would come from being excluded from one of those celebrations. But perhaps that's exactly the lesson I needed to learn. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you for listening. If you've experienced something similar with your own family members, know that you're not alone, and that choosing your own dignity over other people's comfort is always the right choice. Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is remind each other that we deserve better than we're willing to accept. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.